Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, let's talk. Let's have a conversation, shall we? Queen Elizabeth is not the colonizer you think she is. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, many of the Muslim community misunderstand that the Queen is a monarch in the same sense of the Middle Eastern monarchs, who have ranging between absolute power to limited absolute power. Queen Elizabeth II did not. Queen Elizabeth II, King George V, Victoria, all the way down to King George I have been what we call in the business monarchical figureheads. The sovereignty of crime, the sovereignty of law, the sovereignty of wars have been held by a cabal of powerful people inside of Parliament. Whether it be Tony Blair, whether it be David Cameron, whether it be any of these MPs, the bases of almost all forms of modern warfare during Queen Elizabeth, including Winston Churchill, have been held by rationalise, disagree, agree on what she's actually physically responsible for. But to claim that Queen Elizabeth II is responsible for colonialism is absolute garbage. She is in a long line of women and children like Charlie, like Harry, the only person, and William. They are the only persons that have managed to escape that matrix. It is a gilded cage. If anything, the Muslim world should feel pity for them because they don't have the ability or the luxury to give their opinions. Because Charles was massively chastised when he was Prince of Wales for his environmentally friendly behaviour. And then Parliament gave him a telling off multiple times. And this is why, in a parliamentarian point of view, and the press that are around him from my generation have a problem with Prince Charles. They think he's unfit because much of the media, when we were in our 20s, and we thought the media itself was more rational, civil, and less fucking destructive than it is today. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir regime, for us to actually believe in those naive days in the 2000s, to fundamentally realise that Prince Charles has been the most controversial royal in decades, absolute centuries even, because it can fairly be argued that he and his actions are more controversial than anything his mother's done. Now, the Queen has set up enormous charities. She's done a great deal, and she's done a great deal of bad as well, upon her own life. But to accuse Queen Elizabeth II as a colonialist, to be responsible for she can't give away the Cora Diamond. She can't give away any of the relics. She has no direct control over these royal assets that everyone's demanding be returned. They belong to the state. The state is controlled by Parliament. Parliament is controlled by prime ministers and leaders and shadowy men in cabinets making deals and making arguments. This conceptual point of view that Elizabeth had any control over any of these assets is laughable. If anything, she would have damaged a 1,000-year-old constitutional crisis by actually trying to do any of these good things that many of us want her to do. I don't think you quite grasp the damage that damaging a 1,000-year constitution, a 1,000-year-old institution would do. It could have caused civil riots, it could have caused civil wars, it could have caused all kinds of horrible messes. As pro-royalists, I've heard many of them in the past say that they would take up arms to protect the royal family. So Parliament would be placed in an untenable situation where Britain, wrong or right, would be placed in a matter where blood would be spilt. So as a figurehead, she receives a great deal of ire from many of you woke, left-leaning fucking retards who fail to comprehensively understand that she had next to zero power. And what little power she did have, she had always carefully nurtured. Like a moment when sometime during New Zealand's history, she made an argument about how the native people had their legal rights, and a prime minister shut up for the rest of his career about the subject. So you don't actually grasp the realisation of how little power Queen Elizabeth II physically had. These accusations that she was the monarch, and it's a very deceptive way that the establishment of Britain have allowed her to be held. But she's just a figurehead, and she's always been just a figurehead. So when you realise that as only as a figurehead she had zero to no power or control over any of the wars, any of the conflicts during her entire life. And in fact, you can then compound the good that she physically caused. As a historian, I will bluntly say she has done more good than any amount of harm. She doesn't physically have control over any of the financial assets that you would want returned, that yes, were justifiably, they were stolen, thieving from the British Empire, something I have regularly criticised. But it is realising that Queen Elizabeth II isn't some kind of galactic colonialistic power, that she is literally the remnant of what's left of an empire. Yes, she gave birth to the Commonwealth. Yes, she presided over the Commonwealth's, some of the Commonwealth countries' leavings. There are many criticisms you can and you justifiably will give for her and Buckingham Palace. But you cannot sit there and accuse her of crimes committed by parliaments, rich, shadowy men in government, for things that she didn't do. And she had no power to stop, because the people with the power were the misinformed British public. And that has been the case, and that has been always the problem with much of the left screaming. They're not educating the British public on the realities of the British constitutional monarchy. And see, that's another deceptive thing. The word constitutional monarchy is massively misconceptional. You don't understand what I'm trying to get at. You see, as a figurehead, the royal family sits in on loads and loads of ceremonies. They're like normal British mayors, for those of you who understand what a British mayor is. Incredibly symbolic, incredibly ceremonial, but ultimately powerless. I mean, let's be fair, Imran Khan hasn't been able to solve any of the problems that are going on in London right now because his role is purely symbolic. This understanding is something that many of you haven't grasped, on why I've objected for you screaming, rabid, filthy behaviour from the British, from the online ummah, in how they have referred towards a dead woman. And I'm being completely, nonsensical at this point. It is an immorally impeccable position that you have decided to be disgusting in your retort towards an establishment that this woman had almost no power over. No one wants to even discuss this. No one even wants to address the situation that, to be fair, the royal family, they're in a gilded cage. They get to say a little bit about things, a little bit about culture, step out of these borders, and some of these shadowy motherfuckers come up and slap them. They do not have the freedom of expression you do. This is a key reason why Meghan Markle and her husband, Harry, and their children, they fucked off. Because they don't have this. She doesn't have this freedom of expression. She thought it was a princess without any clout. And that's the problem. That is the fundamental problem with the Sussexes. Not the Sussexes, the Cambridges. The reality is that they don't have the ability to speak their own voice. Their opinions are not ones they get to choose. Their speeches are literally rehearsed. People live in these jobs that supply and aid them. Most of the people that actually work for the Buckingham Palace, they're groomed civil servants. You go into that life. In a hypothetical situation, one of you marries a civil servant who's from those groups of families. Your children will be raised to serve in Buckingham Palace in whatever role Buckingham Palace needs. This is the kind of level of institutionalism that many of you do not grasp. Now, maybe I'm exasperating the born into the role part of the servants, but there is that connotation that if you land those jobs, you are there probably for life, unless you do some massive guff. Like, there have been butlers that are fired, but that's why it's news. So do you understand how incredibly intrepidous this institution is? It's layered after layer after layer after layer that is designed to protect the really fucking evil people who are hiding in the closet rooms. I mean, an example I will give you is for a TV show, Sherlock Holmes. One of the Sherlock Holmes ones where Benjamin Cumberland is Sherlock Holmes, and his brother is no, not Benjamin Cumberland. I'm thinking Who am I thinking? I'm thinking the Sherlock Holmes movies by Robert Downey Jr. His brother is the interior executive of the broom closet kind of thing. But it is those people with near limitless amounts of power and access to people of power that move from closet to closet, room to room, whispers and whispers. They're the people who are the ones that have created colonialism. They're the people who are the ones who created these power vacuum positions, and they are like vapor. They stretch from position to position. This is why first past the post. This is why the failed democratic system of the United Kingdom needs massive update. That's why power of return. That's why the lack of representation democracy in the UK, and I'm being fucking real here, there is no representation democracy here. People do not understand that. So I just wanted to stress the point of how powerless the royals really are in their role. And with no harm to them, that's why I'm not a royalist. Because you can't write to the royal family and have problems solved politically, because they have no political power. They have no ability to change anything. And it is wrong, it is morally wrong, it is ambiguously wrong to blame a 1,000-year-old institution that has been entirely defanged, had its venom removed, had its poison removed, had its any bite removed. Even its greatest power is its public will. And it spends it so precariously to protect life, liberty and society of British normality, whilst yes protecting their families. You can judge the Queen by her actions in her life. Blaming her for crimes that she had absolutely no power over is a massive stretch, and much of the Muslim world is angry about stuff that she really had no control over. And I think it is fair to reflect on that reality. What she could influence, she tried very little of. And her son was punished for being a tree hugger. That gives you an idea. The current king was punished for being a tree hugger, King Charles III. So this should give you a very real understanding of how little power they physically have. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.